Ready to roll.
Well, everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the Storybox podcast. Today, my friends, I'm delighted to welcome a pioneer in how we experience media. His name is Mark Randolph. And guess what? This podcast has worked because he's here. Mark is a veteran Silicon Valley entrepreneur, advisor, and investor. As the co-founder and founding CEO of Netflix, I'm pretty sure everybody has heard that company name. He laid much of the groundwork for a service that's grown to 150 million plus subscribers worldwide and fundamentally altered how the world experiences media. He also served on Netflix board of directors until retiring from his company in 2003. He's got a best-selling book, which I have on my wall right there, which you can see. The book is titled, I mentioned in the beginning, That Will Never Work. But like I said, and Mark's got it too on his back wall. He's got the hardcover copy. I've only got the soft cover. That doesn't matter. Welcome so much, Mark, to the Storybox podcast today.
Oh, it's a pleasure being with you. And listen, inside the cover is just the same book. So you'll graduate one of these days to the hardcover version. I promise you.
I'm pretty sure I will. It's the words inside that matter the most. Huh? And I could have gone on and on and on in your bio because you've done so many amazing things. But I'm really curious about all of that, which we'll no doubt get into very shortly. But Mark, I normally start off all my conversations with one particular question that I love asking, which is, what does success look like for you?
Well, success for me is pretty clear. And I was lucky enough to have figured out the ingredients for it pretty early in my life. And I've kind of decided that if you can figure out what you're good at and you can figure out a way where you get to do that most of the time, I would consider that success. And I'm lucky because the thing that I'm good at and I really enjoy doing is early stage company stuff. And for the most part, I've been able to do that for most of my life. So that's success right there. I guess if I was going to layer on one additional component, it's being able to do those things and maintaining some balance in your life. And I've been pretty effective at that as well. I mean, I kind of consider myself almost the luckiest person that you're ever going to meet, in that I have gotten a chance to do this thing that I love doing, that I am pretty good at it. And then I also have time for the other things that are important to me.
You are good at it. And I'm curious, there's two things that I want to go down. But the first one that I want to sort of ask you is more around the balance aspect of life. And you mentioned you say you're pretty good at creating this kind of balance for one's life. I'm curious, how have you been able to do that?
Well, I focus on it. This is not something which just happens. I decided really early on in my life that I was not going to be a one-dimensional entrepreneur. The entrepreneurship thing, you can't stop. I mean, I'm compelled to do that. I knew this was the way I wanted to spend my life. But there's other things to me besides being an entrepreneur. You know, for one, I'm married to my best friend. I have 3 kids, and I vowed a long time ago that I was not going to be one of those entrepreneurs who's on their 6th company, but also on their 6th wife. I also, as a hobby, or as a passion, I guess is a better way to say it, is I'm an outdoors person. The things that really make me whole is getting out and doing challenging, fun things out in the wild. You know, whether that's mountain biking or whether that's climbing or whether it's surfing or kayaking. It's important to me. And those, unfortunately, are hobbies you can't squeeze in between your 10 o'clock call and your 2 o'clock meeting, that you've got to make space for them, as with a family. And so I said, if I'm going to make this happen, I better figure out ways to block my life out that I can get all 3 things done. And I'm not saying it's easy at all. It's very hard, especially when you're in the depths of a startup, because there's times when there's a level of intensity which is hard to walk away from, where things are happening all the time. There's crises. People need you. But one of the really valuable things I learned as an entrepreneur is that life goes on, that even though you say to yourself, oh, I could make that decision better, or this deal really needs me to be involved. The reality is yes, maybe you're right. Maybe the deal would go a bit smoother if you were involved. Yes, maybe the decision would be a little bit better if you were the one who waded in there and had your way able to weigh in on it. But would that delta of difference be important? And the answer is almost always no.
So in terms of, I guess we live in a very noisy world. For a lot of young people, they find it difficult to be or create this balanced lifestyle. I mean, we're constantly busy. We're constantly thinking of new things. So I guess for you, like, I personally want to be exactly like you, create this balanced lifestyle, I know it's not easy, but what would you say to a young person that is struggling to create a balanced lifestyle for themselves?
Well, the first thing is you've got to say it's a priority. This is not something you squeeze in. And what I think gets a lot of people in trouble, at least when they're trying to balance their family with their startup, is they go, I'll deal with that in the time that's left over. And there ends up not being time left over. You know, my wife and I had this policy, which I started well before Netflix, where every Tuesday, and without fail, I would leave work at 5 o'clock, which for a startup is like leaving at noon. I'd leave work at 5 o'clock and we would have a date night, rain or shine. And at the beginning, that's brutal because there are crises, but you begin saying, we're going to wrap this crisis up by 5. Okay, you've got to talk to me? Well, we're going to talk on the way to the car. But what's remarkable is that if you stick with it, eventually everyone realizes Mark is serious. I can't come to him at 4:30 with a crisis. He's going to not want to deal with it. I can't schedule a meeting for 7 o'clock on Tuesday. He's not going to show. And eventually people get used to that and it gets easier. But the bigger benefit, and I'll come back, like, how do you do it if you're a young person? The bigger benefit is that it forms culture. And, you know, I'm saying how important to me balance is. And I've always said in my company, I want my employees to have balanced lives. And it's one thing to say it, but you need to model that behavior. And by modeling that I took it seriously, that I was willing to make these sacrifices to make sure I spent time with my family and with my personal passions, I was signaling I would support other people in doing the same thing. But listen, here's a specific tactic. Most entrepreneurs suffer from an excess of planning. They want to take this idea and they want to think about it and they want to study it and they want to put together a business plan and work on the pitch deck, and they keep this thing in their head. And so much of what I do as a mentor and on the podcast is push people. I go, get your idea out of your head into the real world. So my advice is think less and do more. But when it comes to establishing balance, it's the opposite. If you haven't decided in advance what it is you want, the odds of you getting it are pretty slim. So I always advise you've got to plan how you're going to make this happen. How do you make sure, in my case, that I get to go up to kayak the Noatak River in Alaska, which takes 3 bush plane trips and takes 10 days of paddling, and carving out 2 weeks, it's hard. But I make that decision a year in advance and I figure out how I'm going to do it. I prep for it. How am I going to get ready to go? How am I going to recover when I get back? How am I going to make sure I have time for the special events in my family's life so that I can be there for? When they're young, how do I make sure I'm there when they have dinner before they go to bed? And okay, I can go back to work afterwards. But if you haven't planned this out, it's really, really hard.
Was there ever a time for you, Mark, where you didn't honor that commitment at leaving work at 5 o'clock and you were late to your meeting with your wife?
Of course. You know, I'm very involved with a wilderness leadership school called Knowles. And it was founded by a gentleman named Paul Petzl. And one of his most famous expressions was, rules are for fools. And he was talking about how, especially in the wilderness, you have to use situational awareness. You can't blindly apply the exact same formula to everything because circumstances are always different. So I say always, without fail, rain or shine, because it requires that discipline to make it happen at all. But absolutely, there's occasions where things come up, which, listen, honey, I really feel badly. We're going to have to move it till tomorrow, or we're going to have to do it at 6:30, or we're going to have a date night out on the patio after the kids go to bed. But believe me, it was few and it was far between. But listen, rules are for fools. You've got to recognize that sometimes even the most firmly held principles have to bend.
I'm going to remember that saying now. Rules are for fools. It's so good. I'm curious, Mark, how did you meet your wife, and what has been one of the biggest lessons that you've held dear from her in your own life?
One of my first jobs out of school, my second job out of school, as a matter of fact, was I was running a ghost town resort in the mountains in Colorado in the United States, a little place up in the mountains with cabins, and it was on the Colorado River, and it was probably 50 miles from a big ski resort called Vail. And I was running this thing, which I could have told stories about that forever. That was Mark Randolph Gets Cash Flow 101 drilled into him. But there was a bar and a restaurant. But we shut down in just after American Thanksgiving, which is the end of November, and don't reopen up again until the spring. And so I was kind of caretaking this place over the winter. And you heard me say it was 50 miles from Vail. So I would end up going into Vail and staying with a buddy of mine who worked on the ski patrol at Vail. And I would stay in his house on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday and ski all day. And then on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and his days off, he'd come back and we'd hang out up at this huge resort, which was closed. And it was pretty fun. And my friend on the ski patrol had two female roommates. And one day, their good friend from college happened to come out to visit to stay with the friends. And they said, hey, we're all going up to State Bridge, which is the name of the resort, for the weekend. Want to come? And Lorraine came up with the friends. She spent 3 days hanging out as we all kind of had really fun just by ourselves up in the middle of nowhere in the snow. And she never went back.
Was it?
And go ahead.
No, you go. It's your story.
No, that's a story. I was going to say, what did I learn from her? It's just remarkable. It's that, and this is trite. I won't present myself as a marriage or relationship expert, but I'm still married to her. She's still my best friend. We've both learned you have to make this relationship a priority. That it's not something that just happens, that a lot of times communicating about painful or difficult or scary things requires forcing yourself to do it. And I'd say, here's the biggest success. Okay, now we're getting into the mushy stuff. I don't talk a lot about this. I think my wife and I have had this healthy competition forever about who can do more for the other person. And it's a really interesting way to structure a dynamic is I'm going to try and figure out a way to do more for her than she does for me. How can I surprise her? And listen, couples fight, couples have hard times, but on the whole, I think we've made it. I'm not good. Another 30 years to go or so.
I mean, like you're doing something right because, like, honestly, you're still married to her, which is congratulations. That's not an easy thing, especially in the business world and so many distractions all around us. Today, like I've always admired the old generation how they've been able to, they choose their partner and they stay with them for years, and they're still just as much, if not more, in love with them than when they first met them. And I'm curious, Mark, for you, you go for it. Go for it. It might actually lead to
No, please. I'm sorry. I keep cutting you off. I'm sure you have these great questions queued up. I was just going to say, I passed this really interesting point, which I think people who are listening, who maybe have been in a relationship for a long time, should calculate, which is about 3 years ago, I passed the point where I'd spent more of my life with her than without her. And we had a little celebration of having passed. When I passed the halfway point, I'm a little bit older than she did. Then a little bit later, she passed the halfway point. And it's so far so good.
So in terms of, I guess, risks in relationships, I don't think I've ever heard you mention towards the biggest family risk that you've ever taken. You've spoken about the biggest risk in your business, but not necessarily in your family.
It's a really interesting question. We had a interesting scenario happen to me not long after we were married, in that our house burned down, and it didn't burn to the ground, but it was so severely smoke damaged. We weren't home at the time, and we couldn't live in it. And when that happens, these cleaning companies come in, and they basically take every single thing you own and they take it back to a warehouse and they clean it all. And then because you have no place to live, they put it all into boxes and move it into a warehouse. So Lorraine and I are living in my parents' basement. And everything we own is in boxes in a warehouse. And then I get this interesting job offer. We're back on the East Coast of the United States, in New York. In Connecticut, pardon me. And I get a job offer from a mail order company in California that's trying to do a turnaround. And they want me to come out and see if I could turn them around. And and at the time, this was in January, it was a brutal cold snap. I mean, it was many, many degrees below freezing. Negative 15 C or something like that, really cold. And we're looking at each other and saying, well, everything we own is in boxes in a warehouse. It is brutally cold outside. We're living in my parents' basement. What do you say? Let's basically emigrate to a different country, which is California. And I have to say that was a pretty big risk, because both of our families were on the East Coast. My whole job network was on the East Coast. All of our university friends were on the East Coast. And the two of us flew there with nothing, had our boxes shipped to us, and boom, there we were in California. And it was the two of us against the world in a way. Listen, don't feel too sorry for me. California is a pretty spectacularly beautiful place to live. And we're living actually in Carmel, which people pay a lot of money to vacation there. And we were living there. But it turned out to be fantastic, because it put me in the tech business. It took me out of old school New York and dropped me right into California, right at the dawn of the technology boom. And that ended up probably being the luckiest thing that ever happened to me.
What a story. Going back to, I guess, how you got started doing all this, the tech company startups, being an entrepreneur, an investor. Did you ever see yourself doing that from a young kid? What did you want to be?
No, of course not. I mean, first of all, I had no clue what I wanted to be until I was probably, almost 30. So I hope anyone listening who's young gets the message, which is relax. You don't need to worry what you're going to be when you grow up. Don't worry if you don't know or haven't found this passion yet. It took me a long time. And certainly, I wasn't thinking about tech. Those who are seeing this video, I've been around a long time. When I started, there was no such thing as tech. I predate a personal computer, so there was no point in that. I did realize what I love to do. And I realized I did love to solve these problems that seemed like no one else was solving. I did realize I learned to start things. And at the time, it was starting magazines, it was starting clubs. I was filling gaps in a different way. Mm-hmm. So yes, very on, I realized, oh my God, I love doing this. And even when I went to university, I was essentially majoring in extracurricular. I was running the outing club and putting together programs and trying things. I was starting a magazine at school. I was taking this opportunity to build stuff from scratch. So in some ways, yes, I've been doing this my whole life. But the fact that you could actually make a living doing that, I didn't stumble into that until I was nearly 30.
So in terms of all of these businesses that you have started or run for quite some time, out of all of your life, which one would you say, or what is your greatest achievement and why?
Oh, let's see. I guess the question really is, let's see how Mark frames his greatest achievement. So listen, I'm just going to jump to the punchline. And then if we want to talk about some of the more detailed intricacies of this, we can. But listen, seriously, the biggest achievement is that started 7 companies, or had a hand in starting 7 companies. And 2 of them have multi-billion-dollar market caps. I think 3 of them, maybe 4, have had IPOs. 1 a complete crash and burn. All of them successful in some ways. So the achievement was not in doing that. The achievement was doing that and staying married to the same woman. The achievement was doing that and having my kids grow up knowing me and, as best I can tell, liking me. And for the most part, still getting out and doing more surfing, mountain biking, climbing, and backcountry skiing than most people do. That is the achievement I'm most proud of. Certainly Netflix is, by that aside, Netflix is probably obviously the most well-known. So that's an achievement that's just ridiculous. I mean, who the hell could have known that was going to happen? Looker, which I did after Netflix, in some ways was more economically successful. We Netflix did its IPO, which in some ways is selling the company at a $300 million market cap. We sold Google for $2.6 billion. Sold Looker to Google for $2.6 billion. So that was a 10 times bigger sale. So is that a bigger success? I don't know. Other ones were so much fun. I mean, I'm a direct marketing geek. So the 2 mail order companies I started were hugely fun. Starting a magazine, which I did, as an amateur at university, but then doing it for real, we did 2 of those, was so fascinating because it's such a different, weird business. So they've all got these accomplishments and achievements I'm proud of in different ways, depending upon how you define it. But it all has to come back to, again, you asked the right question at the beginning, which is, how does Mark define success? And the fact that I was able to do all those things while maintaining a balanced life and doing the things that were important to me, I'm pretty proud of that.
I was waiting for you to mention Netflix in there somewhere. And I think you mentioned it perfectly, because you mentioned your family first, then you mentioned Netflix. Now, that's an important thing because Netflix is a beast in of itself. But what I'm curious about is, you mentioned also in that response how you sold these companies for multi-billion-dollar deals. What was your first lesson that you learned when you earned your first $1 million?
It was, wow, life is unpredictable, because the first $1 million came working at a software company, which is where the second company I ended up at in California. I moved out to California to join this mail order company, which was selling computer supplies. Turned it around and sold it. And there I was in Carmel and saying, what do I do from here? And ended up getting a job at a big software company called Borland International. And that was the transition from Mark being a direct marketing guy to being a tech guy. And it was a smallish company when I joined it. And I was not the CEO. I was running their direct marketing, their direct sales, their B2C division. But I built that division from being pretty much nothing into being almost 40% of the revenues. And this is leading to the first $1 million because I had equity in this company through stock options, which was a new concept to me. And the company ended up doing phenomenally well. And little by little, this paper false thing, which my wife and I were going, okay, gave all these options, goody, all of a sudden became worth something. And eventually that value became well more than $1 million. But what was really interesting was one day I was at a bar in Hong Kong with our VP of sales. There you go. There's two guys walk into a bar.
I was waiting for that.
Yeah. I don't even know why I need to give you that detail, just to kind of let you know what a jet setter life I used to live.
It's where all great ideas start.
Yeah. He pulled out a cocktail napkin and we jotted it down. No, we were talking about, I was going, gosh, the stock is doing crazy. And he goes, well, hopefully you've been selling a lot of it. And I went, no, why would I do that? He goes, just keep going up. And he goes, yeah, but right now it's all on paper. He goes, listen, the lesson is, bulls make money, bears make money, but pigs get slaughtered. He goes, if you're doing a great job with the company, they're always going to give you more. So the lesson is as soon as it vests, sell it. Take money off the table. And that next morning, I called a broker and said, all right, vest my options. Let's sell what I have. And he still have a lot more to come. And took the money off the table. And believe me, people, including me, were saying a month, 2 months later, when the stock is 20% higher, going, oh, that was stupid. If you had just held on to it. But then, of course, there's a big correction and the stock plummets. And all the people who had all their wealth tied up in that stock are lamenting it. And what I was saying is, this is great. Listen, if it does great, there's more, and I'll ride what I have left as the upside. And if it doesn't, I've taken money off the table on that cash they can't take away from me. So there's the lesson from the first $1 million. And I have never stopped doing that. Even still, Netflix was hard because you weren't allowed to, because of the position that I was in. It was the wrong signal. But certainly Looker, every opportunity I had to sell stock, I did. And believe me, did great when finally goes. I still had plenty left. But I've been in Silicon Valley long enough to know it is absolutely 100% impossible to know what's going to happen. A disaster can strike at any minute, and you're a nut if you have everything wrapped up in betting on the future.
I think that's a profound lesson. Pigs get slaughtered. I think people are going to remember that. Yeah. Speaking about Netflix, because I'd have a lot of people very angry at me if I didn't actually mention this in the conversation. So you wrote this book, That Will Never Work. Why did you decide to title the book that specifically? And what has been the worst piece of advice you've ever received during that entire process?
So let's start with the title. I mean, the book is called That Will Never Work. My new podcast is called That Will Never Work. And that title resonates with me because that is what every single person told me when I was pitching the idea for what eventually became Netflix. My investors said that'll never work. And my employees, ones who didn't join, say that'll never work. And listen, despite how much I love her, my wife said that will never work. And everyone has had that experience. Everybody has had that moment where you wake up with this amazing idea and then you rush into the kitchen and you tell your spouse, or you come to the office and tell your boss, to your employees, and everyone says that'll never work. And it's just because it's so profoundly impossible to tell a good idea from a bad idea, that the only way to tell is to do it. And that is what the lesson is of the book. That is what the lesson is of the podcast. Is that the only way you're going to figure these things out is by doing it. And what I'm trying to do, both in the book and the podcast, is share all those tips and tricks and secrets that I've learned over 40 years as an entrepreneur to help other people take these ideas out of their head and make them real. That's what that will never work means. It means ignore it. Nobody knows anything, which is my second favorite expression. No one can tell in advance if it's a good idea or a bad idea. Of those 7 companies I started, like I said, nobody could have known in advance which one would be which. The only way to find it out is to do it. And if you haven't accepted that lesson, then you really can't be an entrepreneur.
And did you have any competition at all when you decided to start Netflix? Were any other Stan or any other, were you just standalone?
Well, first of all, in Australia, you see a very different version of what Netflix looks like. But when we started Netflix in 1998, it was a DVD rental by mail company. So if you wanted a movie, you didn't stream it, you didn't download it. We mailed it to you on a DVD in a little red envelope, and there was due dates and there was late fees. And there were 2 reasons why everybody said that will never work. And the first one was the fact that they said eventually, next week, everyone is going to download or stream movies. It's a digital media. And so who's going to want to do DVD rental by mail? And they were right to the degree that it would happen. They were just wrong about how long it would take. But the other reason that everyone said that'll never work is there was this little company in the United States and all over the world, as a matter of fact, called Blockbuster Video, which was a video rental chain. And Blockbuster, in April of 1998, when we launched, had 9,000 stores. They had 60,000 employees. They were doing $6 billion in revenue. So did we have anybody we were competing with? We had the biggest 800-pound gorilla that you can ever imagine. We were saying, why don't you rent DVDs by mail from us when pretty much every single person in the United States and in most of the world can throw a rock and it would hit a Blockbuster Video store. So the challenges for us were just astronomical. I mean, the fact that everyone said that would never work, they were the sane ones. I was the nut, which thought there just might be a way to make this work.
So originally, when you first started Netflix, did you envision it being what it is today at all?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I sat down and I said, I sketched out a plot for House of Cards. And no, who the hell has any? Never. Not in a million years. Really. You have a vision that maybe there's a more effective way for people to rent movies, which is where it starts. You go, this is a frustrating, difficult process. You go to a video store, you can't find something to watch. You have due dates, you have late fees. There's got to be a better way. That was what the vision was. What that better way was, I had some things I wanted to try, but I had no idea. And I certainly go, if this works, yes, eventually people are going to not want to get a DVD mailed to them. They're going to want to stream it or download it. And so we should probably structure this in a way that when that time comes, we can more seamlessly transition to that world. But believe me, that is as far I never envisioned that we'd be making our own movies, never envisioned producing our own television shows, never envisioned that we would be in pretty much every country in the world. And, Netflix and chill? I promise I never saw that coming.
I don't think anyone saw that coming, to be honest with you, until someone created the trend with Ben and Jerry's. So, Mark, I'm curious though, like, why did you, after all this, you had laid the groundwork, everything, it was starting to grow. Why did you decide to leave?
Well, I left the company 6-7 years in. And this is the perfect place to tell that, because it's consistent with what we've said the whole time. Is I started off this entire conversation by sharing with you my definition of success, which was getting to do something that you're really good at and that you love. And what I realized early on, when I was in my late 20s, was that was early stage companies. It was the startup thing. It was solving these really complicated problems with a handful of really smart people. And by 6-7 years in, Netflix was a much bigger company. We had our IPO. We had the cash. We were hiring unbelievably talented people. And so I still loved the company. The way you'd love a child. This was my baby. I loved it. But it was dawning on me that I didn't necessarily love what I was doing. And perhaps more importantly, I wasn't very good at it. When companies get larger, the style of management, the skill set is very different. And it's not something that I enjoy or that I'm good at. And again, I'm going, well, what is success? It's getting to do the things you're good at and enjoy. And I decided I have the opportunity to do that. And I was able to move myself out of Netflix in a gradual, sequential way that allowed people to pick up the things I was handling and the skill set that I had. So I didn't disrupt the company. And I've stayed very, very tight, close friends with Reed Hastings, with all the rest of the team there and the company itself. And now Reed Hastings, my co-founder, is having the time of his life running a $250 billion market cap company. And I'm having the time of my life getting to sit down with early stage entrepreneurs, helping them solve problems. I still get to sit around that table with the really smart people and solve the really interesting problems. And I get to go home at 5:00.
I love that. 2 quick final questions for you, if you don't mind, because I want to be respectful of your time. Do you think that you will ever in the future serve on the board again, just as a advisor at all?
No, pretty close to zero chance. Not because it wouldn't be intellectually fascinating, because the strategic challenges of a company like Netflix and the things they're wrestling with, it would be so fascinating to contribute to. Talk about solving interesting problems. But the reality is that the reason you pick someone for your board is to add value strategically or to provide good governance. And for the types of problems that Netflix needs to solve in the future, I don't have the background or the skill set for either of those. Netflix is no longer a technology company. It's an entertainment company. They've anointed Ted Sarandos, who is their head content officer, as the co-CEO. We have more employees now in Hollywood than we do in Silicon Valley. It has to scale internationally. These are all issues. They have to deal with the government regulations. These are all issues that I don't have any experience with. I'd be if they did that, besides being flattered, I'd be disappointed in their judgment in thinking that I had a lot to add there. I'd be delighted to be picked for the board for the Netflix of the future, which is only 10 people right now.
Wow. I was always fascinated by that. So thank you for sharing. This is my final question, Mark, and it's a hypothetical one. So I want you to imagine with me for a moment that you've been able to reach the age of 100. your friends have decided to put together a film for you, a highlight film or an actual film, whichever one you want, of everything you've ever said and everything you've ever done. Don't ask me how in the world I got it all. We'll call it magic for the sake of an argument. And they've been able to get it and show it to you on your 100th birthday. What do you want that film to say and to show about your life?
I would certainly, so a bunch of things flashed into my mind. So without this being a really well thought together film that I'm describing, one of the things, besides the things that we've beaten to death here about the fact of the time that I've spent with my family and the time that I've gotten to spend climbing some of the iconic peaks in the world and all those crazy things. So yes, I'd like to have people see that he was able to do this. I'd like them to see some of the choices I made. Like, for example, after I brought my 8-year-old son with me for the Netflix IPO, we flew to New York, had this huge, the IPO happened. My life was transformed in some ways. But afterwards, we just got in a taxi, and rather than going to some fancy dinner to have steak and champagne, we went and he had never had New York pizza. And I go, well, that is something that this is the perfect time to remedy. And I decided that was the appropriate way to celebrate this accomplishment. But, the thing that's probably the most interesting for me that's happened in the last 15 years is kind of realizing in some ways what my purpose is here. That I have these things I've learned. I have this 40 years of experience of learning how to take an idea and make it real, how to take the real idea and make it into a company, how to make people find balance in their life, how to help people find balance in their life, how to have a stronger relationship with your team, how to build a good company culture. And I've kind of realized that to take that with me to my grave is a tremendous waste. And that there's so many people who are struggling to have this great idea. I've always wanted to do this, and they don't know where to start. They don't know how to get past those first stages. They've done the first stages, and all of a sudden, this is way harder than they thought. They don't know which way to go. Wow, they have early success. Now, how do I scale it? And I realized that the powerful thing I can do is help people do that. It's the reason I wrote the book. It's the reason I speak pre-COVID all over the world and still do it, virtually. It's the reason I have the podcast I have now, where I am not interviewing celebrities. I am not talking about people who've been big successes. I spend my podcast talking to people who are in the trenches, either just struggling to figure out how to validate their idea, or have gotten this early traction and they're trying to figure out how to scale it, or are struggling with how to balance their home life with their all of a sudden overwhelming work life. So if the movie could somehow show not necessarily me, but show a bunch of these people that I've managed to help take this idea they always dreamed could happen and actually make it happen, that would be pretty cool.
Mark Randolph, the guy that wrote the book, that will never work, but his life resembled. I love it. So I really, truly appreciate your time today, Mark. I've enjoyed this conversation immensely. I've learned a lot. I am in the trenches currently with building this, so I appreciate you making the time out of your busy schedule to come on the Storybox podcast and share your story. So thank you.
No, it's certainly my pleasure. Really, really interesting subject. We don't get to too much conversation is about go-to-market strategy and financing and technology stack. And I think more time has to be spent on the things that you're bringing up. And listen, for those of you who are watching in video, here's a secret handshake. Here you go.
He's one of us, Australia. He's an honorary Aussie. I love it. Mark, where can people find you, connect with you, learn more about you?
So certainly the centerpiece for all things Randolph is my website, which is www.markrandolph.com. And that's where you can find links to my podcast, to my blog posts, to all the other stuff that I'm generating, trying to find ways to get people a bit more motivated and informed. And of course, if that's too much for you, you can always follow all my short form ramblings on Twitter at MB Randolph or Instagram. That'll never work. Or LinkedIn. Well, shit, if you can't figure out how to find me on LinkedIn, then you're beyond help.
I love it. Thank you so much, Mark.